All right, so today what we're going to be working on is graphing sine and cosine with our horizontal shifts. Okay, so that would be moving left and right. So put me on pause and try to identify the parts of the trig functions that I wrote down. Okay, and then come back and check your answers. Okay, so let's see. We have, the first one says y equals a sine b, parentheses, x plus minus c plus d. All right, so we should all know that a is the amplitude, right? That's the absolute value of a, is the amplitude. The number of cycles is the absolute value of b. And notice where b is. B is on the outside of the parentheses. Okay, that's important. My midline is y equals d. Now remember, your midline is your vertical shift. Okay, your vertical shift, that's a shift in there. All right, that's your midline. And that's y is equal to whatever d is. Okay, now c is your horizontal shift. Okay, so c is your horizontal. Okay, your horizontal shift is called your phase shift. And that would be c, plus or minus c, whatever c is. Okay, so your vertical shifts is your left, right, which should make sense with transformations when we're adding or subtracting something from your y value, it's going to move it up or down. When I'm adding or subtracting something from your x value, it's going to move left and right. And remember, this will move opposite the way you think it moves. All right, so let's take a look at the one on the right, which is basically the same thing. I wrote it a different way. All right, so the a, so what I did was I put d in the front. So the amplitude is the absolute value of a. The number of cycles is the absolute value of b, which is what we had before. And then we had the midline is y equals d. It's just in the front. So if the number's in the front, that's your shift up and down. And that goes the way you think it goes. And then we have c, which is inside, which is being added or subtracted from x. That's your phase shift. Okay, that would be your horizontal shift. So that's plus minus c. All right, so we're actually going to graph these. All right, so let's take a look down here. All right, so let's take a look at the equation. Y is equal to sine, parentheses, x plus pi over 2. And I want to graph that in the interval from 0 to 2 pi. Now, always make sure when you're identifying everything that your b value is not inside the parentheses. Because looking back up here at your function, your x has to be by itself. You can't have a number in front. Well, or your number in front of x should be a 1. If you have a 2, 3, 4, it has to be on the outside. That's your b value. What it will affect is not the number of cycles. It'll affect the phase shift if you don't have the b on the outside. All right, so let's see. So my b is on the outside because I noticed that my x is by itself. I have a 1 in front of x. All right, so I have the amplitude is equal to 1, right? It's the absolute value of 1, which is 1. I have my number of cycles. That's what's in front of the parentheses here, which is a 1. The period is 2 pi over 1, which is 2 pi. The number of slashes would be 4 times 1, which is 4. My x scale would be 2 pi over 4, which would be pi over 2. My midline is what's being added or subtracted from my y value, which is nothing, so that's y equals 0, which means it's going up and around. It's oscillating about the x-axis. My range, so it's going up and down 1 from 0, so to be from -1 to 1. All right, now I need my phase shift. So my phase shift is this right here, as long as your x has a 1 in front. So my phase shift is pi over 2, positive pi over 2, which means it will move to the left by pi over 2. Because remember, transformations, when you add and subtract something from x, it goes opposite the way you think it goes. All right, so I need then 4 slashes. So I need 1, 2, 3, 4. My first slash is going to be pi over 2. And then pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi. We are going up to 1 and down to -1. Okay, so now it's a sine curve. Where would we normally start a sine curve? We would start a sine curve here, right? At the line, at the midline. All right, now I need to shift it though to the left, pi over 2. So my intervals here though is pi over 2. So I just need to go to the left, pi over 2. So instead of starting at 0, 0, I have to start at pi over 2. So what would be my next thing? If I'm at the midline, then my sine curve would go up. So at 0, I would actually be up at 1. And then I would come back down to the midline, to my min, back up to my midline, and then up to my max, which is 1. Okay, so now that's what the curve looks like, but I only want my curve from 0 to 2 pi. So what you would do is you would box this off for me. Box this off from 0 to 2 pi. Because that's only what I want. Even though it's shifted over by pi over 2, it's shifted where I started. I don't really want this part. I don't want to look at this part. I'm only looking at from 0 to 2 pi. So just box that off. All right, so now how do you find the interval? So I'm looking at this down here. How do you find the interval where you would see one complete curve? So what you do is you take what's inside the parentheses. So in this case, it's pi, x plus pi over 2. So x plus pi over 2. You equal it to 0. And x plus pi over 2, you equal it to 2 pi. Now you're going to leave it in radian measure. You're going to leave it in radian measure. And you're going to solve this. So minus pi over 2. All right, so this one's easy. So x is equal to negative pi over 2. Now we're going to minus pi over 2, minus pi over 2. So x equals, so you need to plug, remember this is 1/2. So you plug in your calculator, 2 minus 1/2. 2 minus 1/2 is 3 over 2. So it'd be 3 pi over 2. So I see one complete cycle in the interval from negative pi over 2 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 3 pi over 2. They're like my endpoints. All right, I'm going from negative pi over 2 to 3 pi over 2 will give me one complete cycle. All right, so let's take a look on the back. Okay, so I'm graphing y is equal to cosine 3, parentheses, x minus pi over 6 in the interval from 0 to 2 pi. Notice my 3 is on the outside. Right, my 3 is on the outside here, which is good. So the number in front of x is 1. So that's good. All right, so let's start with the amplitude. The amplitude is the absolute value of 1, which is 1. The number of cycles, that's what's in front of the parentheses. That's my b value, is the absolute value of b, which is 3. The period is 2 pi over b, so it's 2 pi over 3. The number of slashes is going to be 4 times 3, which is 12. Your x scale is going to be 2 pi over 12, which is pi over 6. Your midline is y equals 0, because I'm not adding or subtracting anything from the end or in the front. My range is going to be from -1 to 1. All right, now my phase shift. So this is my phase shift. My phase shift is negative pi over 6, which means it's a shift to the right by pi over 6. All right, so let's start by putting down our number of slashes. I need 12. So you have to squeeze 12 in there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I'm just going to count that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay. All right, so I'm going up to 1 and down to -1. All right, we need to label. So the first one would be pi over 6. You guys write yours really neat. Mine's going to end up being sloppy because of how I'm writing. I'm going to change the size of the pen though. So it'd be pi over 6 and then 2 pi over 6. 3 pi over 6. 4 pi over 6. 5 pi over 6. Pi. 7 pi over 6. 8 pi over 6. 9 pi over 6. 10 pi over 6. 11 pi over 6. And 12 pi over 6. So just finish writing that in there. Okay, so now let's see what we're graphing here. So I'm graphing a cosine curve. So cosine, and it's positive. So I would start up at my max here. Okay, but I need to shift to the right by pi over 6. So instead of starting here at 0 at 1, I have to start at pi over 6 at 1. So I'm not starting at 0. So let me get rid of that. So I had to shift over to the right by pi over 6 and put my max at pi over 6. So now since I'm at my max, I have to go down to my min, start going down to my min. So I'll be at the midline and then down to my min and then my midline, max, midline, min, midline, max, midline, min, and midline. Okay, so it looks like this. Okay, now I need to have a graph between 0 and 2 pi. So right now, here's 0 to 2 pi. So here's 0 to 2 pi. So I'm missing this piece inside here. Right, so I have to get it to 0. So if I'm at my max, it would have to come down to its min. So it would have to have that in there also. So this is what it should look like. Okay, so now let's get one cycle, the endpoints for one cycle, the interval for one cycle. So I take what's inside the parentheses, x minus pi over 6 equal to 0. X minus pi over 6 equals it to 2 pi. I'm just going to move everything up a little bit. All right, so add pi over 6, add pi over 6. I get x is equal to pi over 6, add pi over 6, add pi over 6. So in your calculator, you're going to add 2 plus 1 6. So 2 plus 1 6 would be 13 6. So x equals 13 pi over 6. So my endpoints, my interval for one cycle would be pi over 6 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 13 pi over 6. Okay, so let's try one more. Okay, so we're graphing y equals 3 sine. Now in parentheses, I have 2x plus pi over 2 minus 3 in the interval from negative pi to pi. Now notice, hopefully you noticed right away, that my 2 is on the inside. So this is not a 1, so I have to adjust that. I have to factor out the 2. So it'd be y equals 3 sine, factor out the 2, times x plus, now what do I need so that when I do actually multiply the 2 back, I get pi over 2. So hopefully you figured you got pi over, it has to be pi over 4. So that when I distribute the 2 back, it will reduce to pi over 2, right? Because I would get 2 pi over 4, which would be pi over 2, minus 3. All right, so let's see. So this is everything all in one. So I have my amplitude is 3, right? Absolute value of 3, which is 3. The number of cycles is 2. My period is 2 pi over 2, which is pi. The number of slashes is 4 times 2, which is 8. My x scale would be 2 pi over 8, which would be pi over 4. My midline would be y equals negative 3, so it's a shift down of 3. My range. So if I'm starting at negative 3 and I'm going up 3 and down 3, so at negative 3 going down 3 would put me at negative 6. And then up 3 would put me at 0. And then my phase shift is pi over 4, which means it's to the left by pi over 4. Okay, so let's graph this. I'm going to move it over a tiny bit. All right, so I need 8 slashes. It's 4 on both sides. All right, so my midline is y is equal to negative 3. All right, so let's label this. I have pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, pi, negative pi over 4, negative 2 pi over 4, negative 3 pi over 4, negative pi. And since I'm at negative 3, I'm going to go up to 0 and down to negative 6. And 0 there. All right, so let's see. It is a sine curve, so the sine curve would start at the midline, but I need to shift it to the left pi over 4. So instead of starting on the y-axis, I'm going to start at negative pi over 4. I have to shift to the left pi over 4. So if I'm at my midline and it's a sine curve, now it's going to go to its max. So I'm going to go to my max, back down to my midline, down to my min is negative 6, my midline, and then my max. So it'll look like this so far. All right, now I have to continue on the other side. So if I'm at my midline, I'm going to go down to my min at negative 6, midline, max. And that's the whole graph because I want to go from negative pi to pi. All right, and the last thing is I need one cycle. Be able to identify one cycle here. So I take what's inside the parentheses. You can take after you factor out the 2. So you can go from pi plus 4, x plus pi over 4. So to be x plus pi over 4 equals 0, and x plus pi over 4 equals 2 pi. So minus pi over 4 is x equals negative pi over 4. Minus pi over 4, x equals, so you're going to do 2 minus 1/4. So 2 minus 1/4 would be 7/4. So it would be 7 pi over 4. So it would be from negative pi over 4 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 7 pi over 4. Okay, so that's it, and have a good night.